But how do you recommend someone like me who is Jewish and who understands all these things and who has an open mind and critical, how can I communicate this to friends, family, people without alienating myself and being, I know I'm right, but there's a difference between, being self-righteous and losing, and being totally outcast from your whole entire, community, especially back in Toronto, and trying to, but how can a Jew go about, educating Jewish people?
I think that's an excellent and very interesting question. And it has been, I think, for many...
Jewish voices and won't be alone.
I think for many Jewish activists, it's been an urgent and a painful question, because people have had kind of appalled responses from members of their families, members of the wider community, who simply refuse to come to terms with these issues. I think that one can look at, actually, some of the writings in this collection deal at least an indirect way with exactly that issue, because they are accounts by Canadian Jews whose commitment, by the way, to principles of justice, whose commitment to standing up for the human rights of South Africans and of Palestinians came out of their own childhood experience of vicious anti-Semitism in, for example, the 1960s. It's a difficult problem. I think what one needs to do is to be patient. I mean, in a sense, this is what any young person has to do with ignorant elders, right? One needs to say, yes, I love you, but if you love me, do listen, because, and I think this is one reason I like to emphasize that it's not an issue of declaring oneself, an enemy of Israel. I think as I said already, the true friends of Israel are the people who say, wait a minute, there must be an end to these policies which have brutalized Israeli Jews as well as the Palestinians, and policies which everybody can understand. Ehud Olmert, the past Prime Minister of Israel, said, look, this was after leaving office, of course, this country is either headed for an end to the occupation and continued democracy, or for something that will be an unspeakable horror. So I think one needs to be patient and hope for a reciprocal patience. But it is an important question. And it's worth saying as well that a very high proportion, and I think this is a testimony to the ethical strength of Jewish tradition, a very high proportion of Canadian activists in the cause of Palestinian human rights are Jewish.
Dr. Keefer, just I think a lot of... I emphasize with the young gentleman back there, and the question I have in terms of there's a lot of confusion when we use words, and a lot of folks tend to think Zionism equates with Judaism. Can you just briefly define what Zionism is? Then Judaism, so people know the difference. Canadians who don't follow closely, so then when people start throwing the terms around, they realize, aha, hang on, we're not attacking Jewish people, it's Zionism. Can you explain or define Zionism?
I can try.
Okay, this will have to be the last question because we've got to break up. We're past our time already, and Professor Keefer will do his best to answer that question. Then I will ask David Heap to thank the speaker. Okay, go ahead.
Two enormously complex issues, because Judaism is not simply the practice of a religion, although it is obviously principally that and primarily that. It is a tradition, an ethnicity, a kind of ancestral commitment. One can be Jewish and not in any sense a believer and still have a powerful attachment, for example, to either the state of Israel, the people of Israel, or Jerusalem as a place that has a kind of centrality within Jewish memory, whether mythical or historical or whatever. Zionism is, of course, principally a political doctrine of return to and a reconstruction of the semi-legendary states of the Jews in biblical times. So it's a kind of doctrine of ingathering. And oddly enough, it's worth remembering this. It's something that the distinguished historian Yaakov Rabkin points out in his contribution to the book. It's entirely compatible with anti-Semitism. And some of the major exponents of Zionism said the anti-Semites are really helping us. They make life hell for the Jews. We gather them into, to the new state that is to be. Now, I think it's important to recognize that these are complex issues, that Zionism is not a unitary ideology. There are various strands within it. Some strands are apocalyptic, militarily aggressive, violent, and racist. Others, I have a very old and good friend, professor of religious studies at the University of Alberta, who would call himself a Zionist, but who is also a vehement opponent of the occupation. One of the last times I saw him, he said, "Michael, you have to read this work by my friend, another historian of religion, David Shulman. A book I recommend to everyone, by the way, Dark Hope." Shulman is one of Israel's most distinguished religious scholars, teaches at the Hebrew University, and every weekend he does solidarity work in the Palestinian villages of South Hebron, defending villagers against incursions of settlers and attacks by the military. So, now what is Shulman? Shulman is probably some kind of spiritual Zionist. So you see, the issues are complex. I think that we need to. I'm less interested in names than in actions. If people want to continue calling themselves Zionist, but say we stand up for the human rights of Palestinians as fellow citizens, as fellow human beings, and we will put our own bodies on the line to defend them, as David Shulman does, with magnificent courage. And he writes beautifully. I recommend David Shulman's writing very strongly. If you can read his book without weeping, you're more hard-hearted than I am. So it's a good question. It's a complex issue, and I don't think I've answered your question adequately, but there we are.
Thank you, Michael. I just want to say that as part of the Gaza Freedom March and the movement for the Canadian boat to Gaza, at the time of the Mavi Marmara attack, we marched, I happened to be in Montreal, we marched with a group of Orthodox Jews behind a banner that said, "Judaism is not Zionism," to the Turkish consulate to lay flowers in remembrance of the people who had just died that week. But it was very powerful to be with those particular people in that particular march. David Heap of People for Peace London and the Gaza Freedom March. I'm here to thank, which is a great job, to thank Michael for being here with us in London, speaking twice, once this afternoon at the university, once this evening with us. On behalf of all of the organizations, the Citizens Inquest, Iconoclast Media, People for Peace London, and the Gaza Freedom March, thank you very much. We have a token of appreciation. Some of our best local product is this wonderful painting by Ibrahim Shalabi, local artist many of you are familiar with. So that's a painting from us to you. Thank you very much. Magnificent art. As Ibrahim says, he doesn't live anymore in his homeland, but his homeland lives in him, and it lives in his art, and it lives on many of our walls now. So I encourage you to have a look at Ibrahim's art on the way out. And the other thing that we want to say is that the Canadian boat to Gaza will have a small number of people on board, but a lot of people physically on board with the ship, but a lot of people on board with the project. And one way of doing that is to have a look at the books we have outside, including the book about midnight on the Mavi Marmara. And we're giving one to Michael Keefer because he's one of the people who we hope will be morally on side with this campaign. This is that campaign. So we hope that you'll join us in supporting the Canadian boat to Gaza, which is another nonviolent way of opposing the occupation. Very important. There were 3 Canadians on the last flotilla. There's going to be a boatload of Canadians on the next flotilla, inshallah, with all of your support. Thank you very much. Two other things. Sorry, quick announcements. Activists always have announcements. Further to this, one of the people that he was talking about in Israel, working in Palestinian solidarity, Jeff Halper of the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolitions will be here on the 11th of February.